Hello and welcome to our discussion on the Declaration of Independence. Most of us have a mental image of Thomas Jefferson alone at his desk, writing this famous document. It's a powerful image, but is it accurate? Today we're going to explore Pauline Maier's book, American Scripture, Making the Declaration of Independence. Maier's work challenges much of what we think we know about this crucial piece of American history. Pauline Maier was a respected historian who taught at MIT for many years. When she published American Scripture in 1997, it caused quite a stir in historical circles. Why? Because Maier questioned the standard story of how the Declaration came to be. In the next few minutes, we'll look at the process that created the Declaration, from local town meetings to debates in the Continental Congress. I think you'll find that the real story is even more interesting than the myth. By the end, you might see the 4th of July in a whole new light. So, let's dive in and discover the collaborative effort behind America's founding document. Now, let's tackle one of the big myths Maier challenges: the idea of Thomas Jefferson as the sole author of the Declaration of Independence. We often think of Jefferson sequestered away, crafting every word of this historic document. But Maier paints a different picture. She argues that the Declaration was more of a group project than a solo performance. Don't get me wrong, Jefferson was certainly involved. He did write the initial draft, but Maier shows us that his role was more like that of a skilled editor or compiler. He was synthesizing ideas that were already circulating in the colonies. Think about it this way. Jefferson didn't come up with these revolutionary ideas in a vacuum. He was part of a broader intellectual community. These were concepts being debated in taverns, discussed in pamphlets, and argued about in colonial assemblies across America. Maier points out that Jefferson himself never claimed sole authorship. In fact, later in life, he wrote that he wasn't aiming to find out new principles or new arguments, but to express the common sense of the subject in clear terms. This doesn't diminish Jefferson's contribution. If anything, it highlights his skill in distilling complex political philosophy into a compelling document. But it does give us a more nuanced, and I'd argue, more interesting view of how the Declaration came to be. In the next section, we'll look at some of the other declarations that influenced Jefferson's draft. It's a part of the story that's often overlooked, but it's crucial to understanding the collaborative nature of this founding document. Now let's talk about what Maier calls the other declarations, the local and state declarations that came before the big one we all know. This is where things get really interesting. Maier uncovered over 90 of these local declarations in her research. 90, and each one was a bold statement of independence in its own right. These weren't just rough drafts or practice runs. They were serious political documents, crafted by colonists who were ready to break ties with Britain. Let me give you a few examples. In April 1776, North Carolina's Halifax Resolves authorized the colony's delegates to vote for independence. This was the first official action by a colony calling for independence from Britain. Then there's Mecklenburg County, also in North Carolina. They issued their resolves in May 1775, going so far as to declare their own independence from British rule. Now, there's some debate about the exact wording and timing of the Mecklenburg Declaration, but it's a great example of how independence was bubbling up from the local level. In Virginia, we have Richard Henry Lee's resolution in the House of Burgesses, calling for the Continental Congress to declare independence. This was the spark that led to the creation of the document we now know as the Declaration of Independence. What Maier shows us is that these local declarations weren't just influencing the final declaration. They were providing its substance and its urgency. The ideas, the language, even specific grievances against the king, all of these were percolating up from town meetings and colonial assemblies. So when Jefferson sat down to write his draft, he wasn't starting from scratch. He was synthesizing a political movement that had been gaining momentum across the colonies for months, even years. This view gives us a richer understanding of the Declaration. It wasn't just the product of a few great minds in Philadelphia. It was the culmination of a grassroots political movement, with ideas and contributions coming from colonists up and down the eastern seaboard. Now that we've set the stage with the local declarations, let's zoom in on what happened in Philadelphia. Maier's work gives us a fascinating look at how the Continental Congress shaped the Declaration of Independence. On June 7, 1776, Richard Henry Lee presented his resolution for independence to the Continental Congress. This kicked off an intense period of debate and writing. The Congress appointed a committee to draft a declaration, and that committee turned to Jefferson to produce the first draft. Jefferson worked quickly, producing his draft in about 2 weeks. But here's where it gets interesting. Once he submitted it to the Congress, the real work began. For 2 days, July 2nd and 3rd, 1776, the entire Congress essentially became an editorial committee. They went through Jefferson's draft line by line, word by word, and they weren't shy about making changes. Meyer points out that the Congress made 86 alterations to Jefferson's draft, including 48 deletions and 38 additions. Now, Jefferson wasn't too happy about this. He later described listening to the debate as suffering martyrdom. One of the most significant changes was the removal of Jefferson's lengthy passage condemning the slave trade. This was a contentious issue, and several Southern colonies objected to its inclusion. Its removal remains a point of controversy and discussion among historians to this day. The Congress also toned down some of Jefferson's more poetic language. For instance, they changed sacred and undeniable truths to self-evident truths. A small change, but one that significantly altered the philosophical tone of the document. What emerges from Meyer's analysis is a picture of the Declaration as a true collaborative effort. Yes, Jefferson provided the initial draft, but the final product was very much shaped by the collective wisdom and compromises of the Continental Congress. This process of revision and debate is crucial to understanding the Declaration. It wasn't just handed down from on high by Jefferson or any other individual. It was argued over, edited, and ultimately agreed upon by representatives from all the colonies. In many ways, it was America's first exercise in collective self-governance. Now that we've looked at how the Declaration was crafted, let's step back and consider its place in the broader context of 18th century political thought. This is where Meyer's work really shines, showing us how the Declaration fits into the intellectual landscape of its time. First, it's important to understand that the ideas in the Declaration weren't entirely new or uniquely American. They were part of a rich tradition of Enlightenment thinking that was circulating throughout the Atlantic world. Take the concept of natural rights, for instance. This idea that all people are born with certain inalienable rights didn't originate with Jefferson. It can be traced back to European philosophers like John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. What the Declaration did was apply these abstract principles to the specific grievances of the American colonies. Meyer also points out the influence of British political traditions. The list of grievances against King George III, that's reminiscent of the English Bill of Rights from 1689. The Americans were in many ways drawing on their British heritage even as they declared independence from Britain. But the Declaration wasn't just rehashing old ideas, it was also responding to immediate political needs. Remember, in 1776, the war had already begun, but many colonists and potential foreign allies were still on the fence about full independence. The Declaration served as a powerful piece of political propaganda, justifying the break with Britain and rallying support for the revolutionary cause. Interestingly, Meyer notes that the Declaration shared some similarities with the Olive Branch Petition of 1775, which had appealed directly to King George III for reconciliation. Both documents listed colonial grievances, but where the petition pleaded for understanding, the Declaration used these grievances to justify a complete break. Meyer's work helps us see the Declaration not as a bolt from the blue, but as part of an ongoing conversation about rights, governance, and the relationship between colonies and mother country. It was revolutionary, yes, but it was also deeply rooted in the political and philosophical debates of its time. By understanding this context, we can better appreciate the Declaration's true significance. It wasn't just a statement of independence, but a synthesis of Enlightenment philosophy, British political traditions, and the unique experiences of the American colonies. One of the most fascinating aspects of Meyer's work is how she traces the changing perception of the Declaration of Independence over time. It's a story that might surprise you. Contrary to what we might assume, the Declaration wasn't immediately hailed as a foundational document of American democracy. In fact, for the first few decades after 1776, it was largely forgotten by the general public. During the Revolutionary War and the early years of the Republic, the Declaration was primarily seen as a foreign policy document, a formal announcement of America's separation from Britain. It wasn't yet the revered symbol of American ideals that it would later become. So when did this change? Meyer points to the 1790s as a crucial turning point. As political divisions deepened between Federalists and Democratic Republicans, both sides began to invoke the Declaration to support their views. Thomas Jefferson, now a prominent political figure, became more closely associated with the document he had drafted. But the real transformation came in the 19th century. Meyer highlights how abolitionists, in particular, seized upon the Declaration's statement that all men are created equal. Frederick Douglass, for instance, called the Declaration the ring bolt to the chain of your nation's destiny, using its principles to argue forcefully against slavery. Abraham Lincoln was another key figure in elevating the Declaration's status. In his Gettysburg Address, Lincoln reinterpreted the Declaration as a statement of enduring principles, not just a list of grievances against King George III. He placed it at the very foundation of American nationhood, famously describing the nation as conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. By the time of the Declaration's centennial in 1876, it had been transformed in the public mind from a mere historical document into a sacred text of American civil religion. The principles it espoused, equality, natural rights, the consent of the governed, had become central to Americans' understanding of their nation's purpose and promise. Meyer's analysis shows us that the meaning and significance of historical documents aren't fixed. They evolve over time, shaped by how successive generations interpret and apply them. The Declaration we revere today is, in many ways, a 19th century creation, imbued with meanings that its original authors and audience might not have recognized. This evolution continues to this day, as we continue to grapple with the Declaration's promise of equality and inalienable rights. Understanding this history can enrich our modern debates about what the Declaration means and how to realize its ideals. As we've seen, Meyer's work challenges many of our assumptions about the Declaration of Independence. Let's take a moment to address some of the most persistent myths that her research debunks. First, there's the myth of July 4th. We celebrate Independence Day on the 4th, but Meyer points out that the Continental Congress actually voted for independence on July 2nd. John Adams even wrote to his wife Abigail that July 2nd would be celebrated by future generations. The 4th was simply when Congress approved the final wording of the Declaration. Then there's the famous image of all the delegates signing the Declaration on July 4th. In reality, most delegates signed on August 2nd, and some even later. The large, handsome copy of the Declaration with all the signatures wasn't produced until after July 19th. Another common misconception is that the Declaration was widely celebrated right after its adoption. In fact, Meyer shows that early celebrations of independence focused more on destroying symbols of royal authority, tearing down statues of King George III, for instance, than on venerating the Declaration itself. Remember the Liberty Bell? The story of it ringing to announce the Declaration's adoption is likely a myth. The bell wasn't even called the Liberty Bell until the 1830s, and the story of its July 4th ringing didn't appear until the mid-19th century. Meyer also challenges the idea that Jefferson's original draft of the Declaration was radically altered by the Congress. While they did make numerous changes, as we discussed earlier, the basic structure and much of the language remained intact. Finally, there's a tendency to view the Declaration as a radical break with the past. But as Meyer demonstrates, it was in many ways a conservative document, justifying revolution by appealing to established rights and colonial charters. By dispelling these myths, Meyer doesn't diminish the Declaration's importance. Instead, she gives us a richer, more nuanced understanding of this crucial document and the complex historical moment that produced it. Understanding the reality behind the myths can deepen our appreciation for the actual achievements of the founding generation. As we wrap up our exploration of Pauline Meyer's American Scripture, let's reflect on her main arguments and consider why they matter today. Meyer's work fundamentally reshapes our understanding of the Declaration of Independence. She shows us that it wasn't the product of a single brilliant mind, but rather the culmination of a broad, collaborative political movement. From the local declarations in town halls to the heated debates in the Continental Congress, the Declaration emerged from a truly democratic process. By placing the Declaration in its historical context, Meyer helps us see it not as a sudden revolutionary leap, but as part of an ongoing conversation about rights and governance. This view enriches our understanding of the revolutionary period and the intellectual foundations of American democracy. Meyer's analysis of how the Declaration's significance evolved over time is particularly relevant today. It reminds us that the meaning of historical documents isn't fixed. Each generation reinterprets them in light of current challenges and aspirations. This insight can inform our contemporary debates about constitutional interpretation and the application of founding principles to modern issues. Moreover, by demystifying the Declaration and its creators, Meyer doesn't diminish their achievement, she makes it more remarkable. The framers weren't demigods with perfect foresight, but humans grappling with the monumental challenges of their time. Their ability to craft a document of such enduring power, despite their differences and limitations, is all the more impressive. Ultimately, Meyer's work invites us to engage more deeply with our nation's founding documents. By seeing the Declaration as the product of a messy, collaborative human process, we can better appreciate the ongoing work of democracy. It challenges us to see ourselves not just as inheritors of the Declaration's promise, but as active participants in its continual realization. As we face our own political challenges today, Meyer's insights remind us of the power of collective action, the importance of debate and compromise, and the enduring relevance of the ideals expressed in the Declaration of Independence. Understanding our history more accurately can help us navigate our present and shape our future. Before we wrap up, I hope this exploration of Pauline Mayer's American Scripture has piqued your interest in the complex history of the Declaration of Independence. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into American history, there are a few things you can do to support the channel and continue your learning journey. First, if you found this video informative, please give it a like. It really helps others find this content and tells me what kind of topics you're interested in. Second, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What surprised you most about Meyer's analysis? How does this change your view of the Declaration? Share your reflections in the comments below. Your insights could spark some fascinating discussions. If you're hungry for more historical content like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell too, so you don't miss out on future videos where we'll continue to explore the nuances of American history. Lastly, if you want to dive even deeper into this topic, I highly recommend reading Meyer's book for yourself. It's a fascinating read that will change how you think about the founding of America. I've put a link in the description where you can purchase American Scripture, Making the Declaration of Independence. It's well worth the investment for any history buff. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll continue to uncover the complex tapestry of American history.